Washington is shaking right now. Headlines are exploding, officials are scrambling, and the whole town feels like it's running on panic. Trump is fighting political fires on every front, pushing back against accusations, blasting opponents online, and trying to keep control of the story. But while the noise grabs all the attention, something far more important is slipping through the cracks. The deal he brought back from Asia, the one he called a historic breakthrough, is falling apart piece by piece. Rare earths, soybeans, export controls, security talks. None of it is actually moving. And as Washington argues with itself, the reality overseas is taking shape in a way few expected. Tonight, we're looking at the deal that existed only on paper, and how China walked away without giving up anything. Washington is drowning in political drama again. Trump's team is trying to keep control of a situation that keeps spinning faster every hour. The newest wave of Epstein-related revelations set off a storm that reached straight into the White House. Trump fired back instantly, calling the whole thing a Democrat-driven hoax meant to pull the spotlight away from what he describes as their shutdown embarrassment and internal disarray. He didn't stop there. In long posts across social media, he warned supporters not to trust weak Republicans who, in his view, are falling for the narrative. He repeated that the documents released by the Justice Department already clear him, and he demanded new investigations into Epstein's ties to Bill Clinton, Larry Summers, Reid Hoffman, J.P. Morgan, and others. Every message sounded like a counterattack in a fight that refuses to settle. At the same time, he tried to reset the conversation by talking about the economy. Trump claimed that life in the United States is now more affordable, saying inflation was much higher under Biden, and even insisting that Thanksgiving prices this year were 25% lower than last year. Economists have already questioned that number, but the claim spread quickly among his supporters. All of this noise is flooding the political space. The arguments, the accusations, the back-and-forth warnings, they leave little room for anything else. And yet, while Washington focuses on every post and headline, something much larger is unfolding far from the cameras. The story Trump brought back from Asia is starting to crumble the moment it hits reality. Trump returned from Asia speaking as if he had secured one of the biggest diplomatic wins of his presidency. He said China agreed to lift its rare earth restrictions, a major claim, because Beijing controls almost 70% of the world's rare earth production. According to Trump, this breakthrough would protect U.S. manufacturing and strengthen national security. He also told American farmers that China would restart large-scale soybean buying. The numbers he announced were huge: 12 million tons this year and 25 million tons every year for the next 3 years. It was presented as the long-awaited comeback the Farm Belt had been hoping for. The promises continued. Trump said China was ready to ease export controls that had blocked high-tech materials. He said both sides reached a new understanding on fentanyl chemicals. He even suggested Beijing was interested in broader Indo-Pacific security talks. The whole picture was framed as complete alignment, a moment where China supposedly agreed to everything on Washington's list. To Trump's supporters, it felt like a sweeping victory, the kind of win that proves the pressure campaign paid off. But once analysts started reviewing the details, the story took a sharp turn. The first cracks appeared in the area Trump celebrated most: rare earth minerals. The first and biggest promise Trump highlighted was rare earth minerals. He called it the crown jewel of his entire Asia trip. According to him, China agreed to lift its expanded controls on rare earth exports, controls that affect everything from electric cars to fighter jets. The impact would have been enormous because China dominates this market. It produces nearly 70% of the world's rare earth supply, and no other country can replace that capacity anytime soon. If Beijing truly relaxed its restrictions, it would reshape supply chains and give U.S. manufacturers real breathing room. But once the celebration ended, the reality became impossible to ignore. Bloomberg reported that the agreement is nowhere close to being implemented. Chinese regulators haven't issued a single new license. There is no regulatory update, no structural change, no indication that exporters will receive approvals. Companies inside China say they are still stuck in the same limbo they were in before the summit. Even more telling, Beijing hasn't publicly acknowledged any deal at all. Not one official statement confirms Trump's announcement. Meanwhile, The United States moved quickly. Washington rolled back tariffs, paused national security restrictions, and acted as if the agreement had already taken effect. China didn't match those steps. No reforms, no timelines, no commitments. Analysts now warn that China still holds complete control over the licensing system and can weaponize it anytime it chooses. In other words, what Trump described as a breakthrough looks more like a diplomatic nod with no substance behind it. And soon, the same pattern begins to show up in another area Trump put front and center. Soybeans were the emotional centerpiece of Trump's announcement. This was the promise meant to calm the Farm Belt after years of trade war pain. Trump stood before farmers and said China had agreed to buy 12 million tons of U.S. soybeans this year, followed by 25 million tons every year for the next 3 years. It was presented as a lifeline, a signal that China was finally ready to return to American agriculture after shifting heavily toward Brazil. But when traders and analysts checked the numbers, the picture looked nothing like the one Trump described. Right after the truce, China placed a small burst of soybean orders. They were so small and so neatly timed that many market analysts saw them as symbolic gestures, not signs of true demand. And then the orders stopped completely. Market data shows no real shipments, no follow-through, no sign of a buying surge. The reasons are practical, not political. China already bought record amounts of soybeans from South America this year. Brazilian shipments have filled storage facilities across the country. State reserves now hold an estimated 40 to 45 million tons of soybeans, enough to cover nearly 5 months of demand without importing another bean. And inside China, crushers, the companies that turn soybeans into meal and oil, are losing money. Soy meal prices are falling, and margins are deeply negative. No business wants to buy more when they're already operating at a loss. There is also the cost factor. Even after the truce, U.S. soybeans face a 13% import tax that makes them more expensive than Brazilian beans, even before shipping costs. For Chinese buyers, there is simply no financial incentive to choose U.S. supply. The small purchases that did appear came from state-owned companies using temporary government waivers, not from commercial buyers responding to market conditions. Those waivers can expire or be canceled at any moment. One trader summarized it clearly. There's almost no sign China is pursuing a 12 million ton program. The promise sounded large, but it never took shape in China's actual purchasing behavior. And soybeans weren't the only area where the story fell apart once the numbers came in. The same uncertainty appeared in another part of the deal that was supposed to mark a new beginning: export controls. Export controls were another area Trump described as a major breakthrough. He said China agreed to ease restrictions on high-tech materials and components that were caught in the crossfire of U.S. sanctions. According to the U.S. account, both sides reached what was called a preliminary consensus that would reduce friction for American companies and open the door to smoother trade in sensitive sectors. But just like with rare earths and soybeans, none of this appeared in China's official messaging. Beijing never confirmed that any agreement existed. The Ministry of Commerce released a short statement filled with general language, avoiding specific commitments. For companies that rely on these materials, nothing changed. No updated rules, no guidance, no procedures showing that restrictions were actually being loosened. The same uncertainty surrounds fentanyl chemicals. Trump said China agreed to strengthen cooperation and enforcement, suggesting a new push to limit the flow of precursor ingredients. China acknowledged the conversation, but did not issue new enforcement actions or policy changes. Analysts warn that even if China makes small adjustments now, it can reverse them instantly if Washington tightens sanctions or adds new export bans. There is nothing binding, nothing that forces lasting cooperation. What emerges is a pattern. Washington acted as if a detailed agreement existed, while Beijing preserved maximum flexibility. The United States eased pressure, paused parts of its trade response, and treated the negotiations as a completed step. China kept its tools intact, and the effects of this uncertainty are already showing up in the U.S. economy, especially in sectors that depend on clear, stable trade signals. The uncertainty around the deal is already hitting the American economy. Farmers who were told to expect a wave of new soybean sales are now holding back on major purchases. Big equipment makers like CNH Industrial and AGCO report that demand is slowing because customers are nervous. Many farmers say they simply can't risk buying new machinery when China's commitments look shaky. This slowdown is appearing across the wider manufacturing sector. Since the trade war began, the United States has lost around 40,000 manufacturing jobs. Many companies that survive are doing it by cutting costs, delaying investments, or selling equipment at auctions that are becoming more common across the Midwest. Farm bankruptcies continue to rise, adding even more pressure to rural communities that hoped the truce would finally bring relief. Steel and aluminum tariffs were supposed to boost U.S. production, but many manufacturers say they are doing the opposite. Higher material costs squeeze margins, making it harder for factories to stay competitive. One industry leader said the situation clearly: "Steel tariffs are killing us." All of this creates a picture far different from the one Trump described. And as these problems build at home, China's position in the negotiations becomes even clearer. As the dust settles, China's approach becomes easier to read. Beijing has not removed rare earth restrictions or issued the general licenses the United States expected. It hasn't confirmed the soybean program Trump promoted, and it hasn't eased the export controls Washington thought were part of the understanding. Even the fentanyl cooperation Trump mentioned hasn't produced new enforcement actions. Most of these commitments were never acknowledged in China's official statements, which tells analysts something important about the wider strategy. China reduced immediate tension after the summit, especially the threat of new 100% tariffs, but avoided making structural concessions. By keeping every tool in place, from licensing power to industrial controls, Beijing preserved full leverage. This allows China to wait, observe U.S. politics, and decide later how much cooperation benefits its long-term interests. It is a familiar pattern in major negotiations. China gives diplomatic signals when pressure rises, then slows everything down once that pressure fades. Promises remain flexible, timelines stay vague, and every option stays open. And now the question that hangs over the entire deal is whether China plans to move forward at all, or whether these signals were simply a way to buy time while keeping every advantage intact. The biggest questions are still ahead. China has not committed to any clear timeline, and that opens the door for long delays. Beijing can stretch negotiations for months, wait for new political pressure in Washington, or release only partial licenses that keep all the leverage on its side. Soybean purchases could stay symbolic, just enough to calm markets without creating real dependence on U.S. supply. And the United States may eventually have to confront a harder truth. The leverage it gave up cannot be regained quickly. Every sign points to a deal that is drifting, not progressing. And in geopolitics, leverage is everything. Once it slips away, getting it back is a fight that rarely ends on the terms you expect. If you want more unfiltered analysis cutting through political noise and showing the real shifts behind the headlines, subscribe and share. Independent voices only exist because of you.